Welcome everyone to the Inter Neighborhood Cooperation Transportation Committee for September 8th, 2022. We have a very full agenda tonight. I've got that up on the screen at the moment. We have updates that are extremely timely and informative on statewide matters, regional matters, and a lot of Denver matters from both the people who are engaged in these topics and advocates on these topics. Just a really fantastic agenda, I think, and I try to put together good ones, and sometimes it just stands out to me that the stars have aligned. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite our first speakers up. First, we have Doug Rex, Executive Director of DRCOG, and Jacob Reiger, who also works at DRCOG in Long Range Planning, and they'll be talking about some really up-to-the-moment changes in their long-range planning. Doug, over to you, and Jacob.
Great, thank you, Joel, so very much. And I'm going to kick it off here tonight. First of all, I want to thank you very, very much for the opportunity to be here. You do have a great agenda tonight. I kind of wish I had prepared to be for the whole session. I'm going to try to hang on as long as I can. I'm supposed to go over to my daughter's and move some furniture, so maybe I can hang out here and blame work. But anyway, thank you also very much. And it is a very timely opportunity for us to speak. As most of you probably know, we are in the process of updating our regional transportation plan to comply with the state greenhouse gas rule. And before I kick it over to Jacob, Jacob has forgotten more than I know about this whole process. And he's been very, very intimately involved. But my role here today is basically just to be available for questions and at the end of the meeting. But Joel, is the group familiar with what DRCOG is?
I think generally, I see you have a couple slides, there, but you don't probably have to spend too much time on it. Okay,
that sounds good. Then I'll just let that roll, and I'll introduce Jacob as our long-range transportation manager, and he's more than capable of leading us through the path we're about to go on. So Jacob, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Joel. Really appreciate being here tonight. We visited with you when we were preparing our original 2050 regional transportation plan that we adopted back in April of 2021. So we're very pleased to be back here tonight to talk to you about the 2022 update to the plan. So speaking of DRCOG and what is DRCOG, since I hope many of you are familiar with us, I'll just touch on this slightly. We are sort of the regional government association. Every local government in all our parts of 10 county region has a seat at our table. We bring together 3.4 million people. We are the planning agency for the region. We wear several hats, both federal and state designated hats that we wear. Most important for our conversation tonight is a federal designation. We are the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, for the Greater Denver region. And that is a federal designation that says DRCOG leads the multimodal transportation planning process in this region and complies with federal and state requirements. But we do that in very close partnership with CDOT, with RTD, local governments, all of you, and other stakeholders throughout the region. And we'll be talking about our MPO role tonight in our regional transportation planning process. And specifically, we'll be talking about what we're calling the 2022 update to our 2050 regional transportation plan. This is one of the primary documents, one of the primary planning products that we produce at DRCOG. While we do it to meet federal requirements, we would do it anyway. It really is, we'd like to characterize it as the region's transportation plan. We work with every stakeholder that you can imagine in the region to put this plan together. And at the end of the day, what it really does is it brings together all of the projects, investments, programs, services, funding, expenditures, everything that's needed to maintain, operate, and evolve our multimodal transportation system in the DRCOG region, regardless of funding source, regardless of project sponsor, brings everything together. And it really sets that framework and that vision for what are the multimodal transportation needs and priorities in this region, in this case through 2050. When we prepared the original regional transportation plan that we adopted, the 2050 plan that we adopted last year, that was a 2-year planning process that we went through. And as a result of that process, we heard very consistently from stakeholders, from the public, from our own committees and board, these 6 priorities that we ended up organizing the plan around. I'm not going to read these to you in the interest of time, but I think these hopefully resonate and kind of make sense. We organized the plan, we organized investments in the plan around these 6 key priorities, and these have been our anchor going forward as we update the plan this year. So in terms of updating the plan, we're really talking about the state's greenhouse gas planning standard. Shorthand, we call it the greenhouse gas rule, or the GHG rule. But this greenhouse gas planning standard was adopted in December of last year by the State Transportation Commission of Colorado. It applies to CDOT, and it applies to the 5 MPOs, or the Metropolitan Planning Organizations in this great state, including DRCOG. For us specifically, our 2050 Regional Transportation Plan must meet the greenhouse gas rule's emission reduction levels that are set for us in the rule for 4 analysis years, 2025, 2030, 2040, and 2050, and I'll show those to you in a minute. Our updated 2050 Regional Transportation Plan must be adopted by October 1st of this year, so we're getting close. We're about to enter into our adoption process. The emission reduction levels that are required of us in this rule are from a baseline, and that baseline is actually defined by the rule, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's a little bit different from what we typically do in our federal air quality conformity requirements. And finally, another key point is that our analysis is focused on several strategies to meet the reduction levels that are required of us in the rule. And in fact, well, first, let me show you the reduction levels that are required in the rule. Let me orient you to this table. It's a little bit, maybe not as intuitive. First of all, it's in million metric tons, which is not something that I think any of us use in our daily lives, but it is the measurement that is used in the greenhouse gas planning standard. It's a metric that's used and that we need to respond to. What this table is showing is the reduction levels that are required of both CDOT, DRCOG, and the other MPOs in Colorado for each of those analysis years. These are reduction levels, again, in million metric tons for each analysis year that we need to meet and that the other agencies need to meet to be in compliance with this rule. This really comes from Senate Bill 260 and Colorado's greenhouse gas reduction roadmap, I think was the technical name of it, which covers all sectors that are involved in greenhouse gas reductions. The greenhouse gas planning standard that we're talking about tonight refers to surface transportation, so multimodal transportation. So while at the state level, there's other processes involved in like power plants and oil fracking and all of those sorts of things, we're responding to the greenhouse gas planning standard for this particular element of the overall roadmap. So I mentioned that we have kind of a multi-pronged strategy, and this is one of the key takeaways for us as a technical staff as we've been through this work over the last 6 to 8 months. We realized, we knew coming in that it was going to take, a variety of things in order to meet the reduction levels. I think what we learned as a staff is that it's not just 2 or 3 or 5 things. It really is more like 15 or 20 things, give or take, all put together into a framework of strategies in order to meet the reduction levels. This graphic illustrates the major thematic elements or components of that strategy framework that we've put together. So really briefly, and I'm going to touch on a couple of these in more detail, but working our way from left to right, adopted programmatic investments. This refers to the programmatic investments that are in our adopted 2050 Regional Transportation Plan that we adopted last year. By programmatic, we mean non-project specific investments. These are smaller scale things that in a 30-year plan, we don't typically sort of identify as individual projects. Things like sidewalks and bicycle paths and local bus routes and intersection operations. I call it the connective tissue of our transportation system. It actually is a substantial part of our regional transportation plan. It's a big part of our financial plan, but we don't typically model those things because they're not project specific. So I'll touch on that in a moment. But part of that framework was really getting our arms around both the adopted programmatic investments that are already in our adopted plan and additional programmatic investments that we're proposing to include through some changes in this 2022 update to the plan. Another thing was telework adjustments in our regional travel model. Obviously with COVID and now entering post-COVID and trying to forecast over the next 30 years to get a sense of, at a regional level for this very, entire diverse region, what might telework behaviors look like, but that was part of our strategy as well to think about that from a technical analysis perspective. And then over on the right, I'm going to touch on a couple of these as I go through tonight. Major project changes in the plan. We did strategically change some of the projects in the plan to comply with the greenhouse gas rule. We looked at from the time that we originally did our land use forecasts, which is one of our key inputs in developing our regional transportation plan, we now have some observational data for the past 3 years and for the next couple of years. We adjusted our land use forecast based on observed data of how the region is developing. And then in the greenhouse gas rule, and I'll touch more on this in a minute, it provides for something called mitigation measures as sort of that last set of strategies to close the gap. And I'll talk about those more in a minute, but that was part of our strategy framework as well. So just really quickly, this is admittedly a confusing and complicated process. The rule is very technically complex. We wanted to try and just diagram out the major sort of workflow and process steps that we used in our work to comply with the rule. So we started with the baseline. So working from left to right, step one was defining the baseline, which is specified for us in the rule. The rule basically says the baseline is our 2050 regional transportation plan as we adopted it in April of last year, but as we modeled it at the time of adoption. So it turns out that's really important. It's important in two ways. Everything that was included in the plan that we modeled becomes part of our baseline. The reduction levels are in addition to what's already included in our plan. But things that were in our plan that were not modeled at the time, we did have the ability to capture as part of our compliance with the rule. And we actually spent some time thinking about how do we get our arms around some of those programmatic investments that weren't originally in the model, but are really important to the overall plan. That was step one. Step two was reflecting, well, step one was defining the baseline. Step two really was trying to capture those programmatic investments in the telework rate assumptions in our technical analysis related to our adopted plan and our technical analysis to comply with the rule. Step three was those major sort of strategic changes to the projects that we do define in the plan. I'll talk more about those in a minute. And then step four, again, to kind of close that remaining gap, was something called the mitigation action plan and the mitigation measures that are specified in the greenhouse gas planning standard. So first with the programmatic investments, this is where it gets really technical, and I'll try and not make this very dry, but the point here is that, as I said, in terms of the substantive portion of the plan, the financial plan, these non-project specific investments are really important, even though they're not identified as individual projects for a 30-year plan. So really one of the first things that we tried to do was to understand those programmatic investments that we already had in the adopted plan and understand how we could incorporate them or represent them within our regional travel demand model. So as I animate this slide, it starts to look really complicated. But the point here is that we're trying to take each of these things on the left, these sort of categories of investment, and we're trying to relate them to specific, to use a cliche, dials or levers in the model, ways that we can represent them or include them within our regional travel demand model so that we can accurately and reasonably capture those investments in our modeling and the greenhouse gas emission benefits associated with those investments, because they are so important in our 30-year plan. Step two, the project modifications. I want to spend a moment on this because I know there's interest in this. So once we got through the programmatic pieces of it, we looked at the major multimodal projects that we do identify in the plan, and we have a federal requirement to actually identify and to map and to model the major multimodal projects, the major roadway, freeway, transit, fast tracks type projects that that are in this plan for the region. In the lens of the greenhouse gas planning standard, we wanted to take a fresh look at that project investment mix and look at it from the perspective of the rule to say, were there some things that we could sort of strategically, surgically do to some of the projects in the plan to make them a little bit more GHG friendly and help us comply with the rule? So from kind of top to bottom here, let me talk through those. We worked with many project sponsors, and in this case, starting with the freeway managed lane projects, we worked primarily with CDOT to see on some of those projects if we could increase the focus of those projects even more on safety, operational, transit, community connectivity, and other multimodal aspects and associated greenhouse gas benefits of those projects. What has been in the press and what CDOT has talked about in particular is a little bit of a refocusing of the Central 25 project as an example of that. That project is still in the plan, still in CDOT's plan and still in our plan, but sort of the characterization or the scope focus of that project has changed through this analysis together. Some of the projects in the plan are projects that we say are DRCOG administered funded projects. So we're not directly in charge of these projects. We don't build projects per se, but through our processes of allocating federal funds to projects in this region, what we call the DRCOG administered projects, we looked at that list of projects. Some of those projects are projects that are roadway projects that are, say 2 to 6 lanes or 4 to 6 lane widening projects over time. in the plan over the next 30 years. We looked at those projects to say, could we keep those projects at 4 lanes instead of 6 lanes? But again, refocus those projects, and we work with project sponsors to talk through, because we do have a very diverse region. Each of these projects is a bit different. Each of these projects is trying to address particular components. So we worked with project sponsors on these projects to say, could we keep them at 4 lanes, but refocus them again even more on multimodal safety, transit, complete street, operational type investments to solve the challenge that these projects are trying to address, but to do it in a more greenhouse gas friendly way. In the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan that we adopted last year, we defined a robust network of bus rapid transit corridors throughout the region, 10 to 12 corridors to implement over the 30 years of the plan. Through this work, we are admittedly aggressively advancing 5 of those bus rapid transit corridors to be complete by 2030 through a multi-agency planning and funding partnership. So this is not just RTD, this is the combined efforts of several agencies, RTD, DRCOG, CDOT, City of Denver, other local governments, maybe other partners, federal funding to come to some of these as well. But by 2030, the plan is pretty aggressively proposing that the region completes the East Colfax BRT corridor, the extension to that corridor in Aurora, State Highway 119 between Boulder and Longmont, the Federal Boulevard corridor, and the Colorado Boulevard BRT corridor, and also advancing the Broadway-Lincoln BRT corridor into the middle stage of our plan from downtown Denver to Highlands Ranch. And then finally, through these project changes and through some changes in our financial plan, our cost feasible financial plan that's part of the 2050 plan, we're proposing to reallocate and finance $900 million in part to some of these project changes, but in large part to invest even more in the non-project specific programmatic investments that are really key to helping us comply with the greenhouse gas planning standard. And frankly, as I said, the connective tissue of our transportation system, also important to help support some of these other major investments in the plan. Finally, the last piece of this is something called a mitigation action plan, needed as a last step to close the remaining reduction level gap to demonstrate compliance with the rule. The mitigation action plan, which would be adopted by the DRCOG board, would document the region's approach to using mitigation measures, which are defined in the greenhouse gas planning standard and subsequent policy making by CDOT. It would report and analyze on these measures at the regional level. So again, this is all a regional analysis. Implementation, though, would be anticipated in a small fraction of our region in strategic and applicable geographies. That'll be a little more clear when I show you the mitigation measures on the next slide. But the point is that these mitigation measures are meant to be customized to where they make sense in our very diverse region. So they don't necessarily apply everywhere across the region. We'll have ample opportunity as a region to implement successfully over time to help achieve compliance. We don't need mitigation measures to comply with the rule until the 2030 analysis year. So we have 8 years or so to kind of work on this together as a region. And from the local government perspective, they are entirely voluntary. They're not required to be implemented in any specific location at any specific time. That comes from the greenhouse gas planning standard. So it's a mix of sort of a voluntary approach at the local level, but regional coordination and a regional mitigation action plan that we would adopt to set this in motion at the DRCOG level per the greenhouse gas planning standard. So briefly, the mitigation measures and the greenhouse gas reduction levels associated with them: increasing residential density where it makes sense to do so, increasing job density, again, where it makes sense to do so, mixed use transit-oriented development, primarily around RTD's rail system and rail stations, as well as the bus rapid transit corridors as defined in the plan. Reducing or eliminating minimum parking requirements, again, where it makes sense to do that, and adopting local complete street standards, something that the City of Denver has done. We have done at the DRCOG level, at the regional level. Some local governments have as well. The idea is to encourage other local governments to adopt local complete street standards as they wish to, and to use those standards in project design and implementation. So none of these are new things. We're already doing this together as a region. We're trying to build on those collective efforts and encourage, even more activities or even more activity in these mitigation measures as part of complying with the greenhouse gas planning standard. So we did a technical analysis that this slide doesn't do justice to understand where's the sort of additional increment of change or opportunity to continue to do these things, and what are the greenhouse gas emission reductions potentially associated with that level of activity to implement these mitigation measures over time. So when you put that all together, you get a table like this that basically takes everything that I've talked about in this presentation so far, the programmatic funding, the programmatic investments in the adopted plan, the telework, the mitigation measures, and sort of all the strategies that I showed you in that strategy framework slide. And it shows the greenhouse gas emission reductions associated with those things together, basically adds that up all together in the fourth row, the total greenhouse gas reductions. These are the total reductions, again, in million metric tons per the rule for each of the analysis years. And we compare those with what's required of us in the rule from the table I showed earlier. That's in the bold red, what's required for this region at the regional level per analysis year. And we make sure that the bold black is greater or higher than the bold red to demonstrate that we're complying with the greenhouse gas planning standard reduction levels required of this region through the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. I should note, in sort of a, that's sort of a dry way to say it, it's not just about complying with the standard. As we've gone through this process and working with our stakeholders and our partners, what we're really trying to do is encourage and build on the good planning that's already taking place in this region, and to encourage that and invest even more in that going forward. But yes, in a way that helps us comply with this new state rule. So having said all that, that's all the sort of technical work. We just completed our 31-day public review and comment period that ended on September 6th. We had our public hearing yesterday in front of the DRCOG board. This is a snapshot about halfway through the public comment period. We had a social pinpoint engagement site where people could comment to us on an idea wall, but also comment with each other, which we did get a lot. We had several open houses through the 30-day public comment period, some of which featured Spanish translation, Spanish interpretation that we had not done before. Our public hearing yesterday featured both Spanish translation and American Sign Language interpretation. We ended up getting close to 350 comments through our social pinpoint site and through the public hearing, several speakers yesterday at the public hearing. So as you might imagine, staff is currently responding as part of our obligation and transparency in our transportation planning process. We are responding to every single comment that we've received, and we're going to prepare that documentation and make that part of our committee and board adoption process coming up later this month. Our board will take action on September 21st to hopefully adopt the 2022 update to the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. So I know that was a lot, but wanted to give you that overview, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. If I could just ask, Jacob, you did identify, of course, that the press has picked up on some of the headline changes to the plan. If you could go back to your screen that highlighted the big ones and give us just, I want to be able to get to questions, but give us a sentence or two about what each one means, what we would see in the future with this modified plan different than the previously adopted plan.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. Appreciate that. One of the things that we actually did, and it's on our social pinpoint site, is for these major multimodal projects that we do identify in the plan, we list them in a table, we map them, we include them obviously in our travel modeling. We actually did a track changes version, a markup version of the table. It's called table 3.1 in the plan, to show the specific project changes so that people could clearly see what all the changes are. But in the big picture, they encompass a few things. One is that as part of this process, I didn't mention this before, we do, between major updates, give project sponsors the opportunity to request what we call project-based amendments. So we do that typically annually. That was part of this process. So some of these changes are sort of project requested amendments to projects, change the scope of the project, the time of the project, the cost of the project. But in terms of compliance with the greenhouse gas rule, again, the big changes here, Central 25, I already mentioned, C470, primarily in Jefferson County. That was a project where we had both kind of bottleneck interchange project in the plan, as well as a managed lane widening of the roadway in Western Jefferson County. That latter project we did actually remove from the plan. We kept the bottleneck project and then refocused the widening project. I think from memory, I think those are the two major freeway managed lane projects. I don't think I'm missing one. Those were the two major ones. I talked about the bus rapid transit network. That's really one of the major set of aggressive changes in the plan, is to advance some of those bus rapid transit corridors. And then, as I said before, part of this, and I touched on the 6-laning projects, there were several of those projects, probably close to, I want to say 6 to 8 6-laning projects in the plan that, again, we're keeping those at 4 lanes, refocusing the scope of those projects a little bit. And then the other major takeaway, as I said, is that through these project changes and through changes in the financial plan, reallocating an additional $900 million, which is a fairly significant amount to non-project specific programmatic investments, for which we did do an analysis that's in the plan that shows kind of the benefits associated with that additional sort of programmatic investment. So Joel, that was a little bit of a long answer. Does that give you the information you're looking for?
I think people can ask more questions. We're going to try to go rapid fire through some of these questions. So if we could have quick questions and quick answers. David Kurth has a question about modeling.
Yeah, I was just wondering how the coordination with the CDOT model is going in terms of the travel into the region. Travel
Maybe short someone to protect you.
Hello?
We can hear you. Somebody else was just unmuted. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, how the coordination with the CDOT statewide model is going in terms of travel into and out of the region, through the region, with the recent changes based on COVID, how that coordination is done. Is it still being coordinated, or to make sure
Yes.
you're using the same assumptions?
Yes. Yeah. So short, easy answer is yes. Yes to all the above. But just very briefly, we have always done that with CDOT, even before the Greenhouse Gas Planning Center, and even before COVID, but definitely through both COVID and through this rulemaking. I think even weekly meetings with CDOT and with other modeling stakeholders on that coordination of our modeling techniques, our compliance with the rule, and the data that we're including in our model when we're talking about interactions between different regions of the state. Yes, indeed.
David, I might just add to Jacob's answer on that, and he is right. We are utilizing the same modeling platform now, which really helps in our coordination. And the fact that most of the modeling staff that are working at CDOT right now worked at DRCOG at some time. So that relationship is pretty darn good.
Okay,
Good
we'll
to
go
hear.
to Richard Crane as a practical question about the state of our local infrastructure. Richard?
Hi, yeah, good afternoon, good evening, I guess it is. I'm just always amazed. I mean, I think about roads from at I-70 and Wadsworth that goes north, and it's just a horrendously horrible road of trash all along the road. So you have a horrible road that you can't really travel well in a car. And, then you have all those businesses that, you have to get to by a car. So, I mean, I really look back at this and I think about how do you really reduce greenhouse gases when the majority of our land use is totally unwalkable, totally unbikeable, and transit is negligible. And it's never going to work in that kind of environment. It just seems like to me we've got to focus our land use planning. So, you develop your transit first and then work around all the amenities around that, meaning, neighborhoods and stores and things like that. So I'm wondering how we really address greenhouse gases without looking at our land use.
Yeah, no, appreciate that question. That's one that's hard to give a pithy quick answer to, but let me start first of all by saying, because I know Doug will want me to say this, from the DRCOG perspective, land use is the direct and exclusive purview of local governments. While DRCOG supports our local governments in the Denver region with growth forecasts and data and information and resources, land use planning is the direct purview of local governments. That said, one of the things that we do try to do at DRCOG is really bring together our local governments to solve regional problems, in particular the integration of transportation in land use planning. And we all recognize, both in this group and at DRCOG and throughout the region, that you need to have integrated and coordinated land use planning and transportation planning to solve the region's problems. What I'd say in this context is that our transportation plan is really trying to balance a lot of things. It's trying to, address the needs that we have in this region today. It's trying to look out 30 years. It's trying to maintain our system, expand our system, evolve our system. We're going to add 1 million people to this region over the next 30 years. And we're all conscious of the fact that that is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, because while it's a cliche, it's true. How we grow is how we go over time. And so we do all work together, and it is a constant sort of turning the Titanic kind of challenge of working together to really maximize those opportunities around so many different players, so many different folks involved in both transportation and land use planning. But we all work together to try and be aligned in terms of regional goals that we have, local governments have, the state has, in terms of what we want to see from a coordinated land use and transportation system.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to say there beyond land use. There's in the original question in the chat, the condition of basic sidewalks. Can you get to transit or not? And unfortunately, Denver's in a terrible shape, and many of our council members, including one you know well, is saying, well, now's not the time to have a systemic, sustainable approach to maintaining our sidewalks. So there's some deep issues here. John Rickey has a question about BRT design.
Hello, yes, I'd like to actually wrap that up into the one that I just posted. How can you stop our agencies from redefining success? CDOT says widening I-70 would reduce pollution. RTD says adding bus benches but not bus lanes counts as BRT. Dottie says that pedestrian focused streets have parking on both sides but not make the sidewalks any wider. They're currently making all these definitions and then patting themselves on the back, which are clearly and plainly false. Can you stop? Is there a measurement you can do? Is there any legislative power you have to stop them from trying to pull this off?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a tough question, John. I think the short answer is directly no, we don't at DRCOG in terms of, sort of direct project design. Again, we use the carrot, not the stick approach. What I will say is that when we constructed the original 2050 regional transportation plan and certainly this 2022 update, we all recognize that details matter. You can have a 30-year plan, right? But it's how these projects get implemented. At DRCOG, and I think across the region, we're trying to direct increasing resources towards project implementation, towards bridging that gap between a 30-year long-range plan and a 4-year, for example, transportation improvement program, which we allocate dollars for project construction. So I guess the point I'm getting to is that we've always been intentional that the details matter, through our regional complete streets toolkit, for example, about how, our recommendations on how streets should be designed and so on and so forth. So our commitment to the region has always been that we want to work with willing project sponsors and willing stakeholders to really get into the details and really help shape from a collaborative perspective, how these projects are designed and implemented over time to meet the intent that we have for them in the overall framework of the RTP.
So
let me just add to that. John, if I may, I appreciate the question for sure. And I just want to hit on the BRT portion of that. I think we're all pretty excited about where we're headed with regards to the Colfax BRT that we're hoping to receive, good news on the federal side here sometime soon with regards to funding. I think that is really going to be hopefully a model for how we do BRT routes going forth. So the success of that route is really, really important, I think, for where we go with the other BRT routes that we're looking at. And we're being pretty darn aggressive with BRT construction in this plan. What's the number, Jacob? It's like $900 million worth of investment have been, we're moving forward to complete, hopefully complete 5 BRT routes by 2030. Is that correct?
No, it's not 900 million exclusively for BRT, but it is advancing those 5 BRT corridors by 2030.
Yeah,
for sure.
But if they don't have their own lanes, how can you call them BRT? It's just a bus.
Well, right. Well, yeah, I understand that, but I think the Colfax BRT route, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys probably know more about this than me. They are taking a lane to run at least at certain times of the day, maybe full 24 hours.
The East Colfax will have a dedicated right of way. We're going to have David Krutzinger on here soon, and I think this is a design question about some of the other corridors. It seems as if they're talking about dedicated lanes on the outside, which is semi-dedicated because people will cross them to park and cross them to turn, and potentially other places where it's some definition of BRT without dedicated lanes at all, perhaps, which really raises questions about reliability and frequency.
Even Colfax is only half dedicated.
Aurora versus Denver is a distinction, Doug, on
Yes.
the East Colfax.
Yeah. I think the bottom line is that every corridor is unique and different when you think of federal and Colorado and Colfax and State Highway 119. And so part of the regional challenge is that we all will need to work together to define each of these as these corridors get implemented, for sure.
Great. Yeah, I know. David Kretzinger is our next speaker. He has not joined yet. He did let me know that he's trying to get off of another meeting. So we'll just continue with a few questions here. Amanda Roberts had a question about existing partially funded projects.
Yes, Amanda here. Hi, everyone. And Tim, I see you driving. It's kind of unsafe to drive distracted. So I want to just make sure you maybe pull over and, you know, take a chill pill and listen to what we have to say. So I have a question about unfunded projects. The I-25 Broadway project, a wedge ramp project, that's a huge project Denver's doing. And part of it, the part that where homes are being knocked down, that's not been funded yet. And it's going to add more car infrastructure. More cars are going to be driving through the area. Can you tell me the thinking of why this new rule doesn't apply to that? Because I know it apparently doesn't. Thank you.
Yeah, and look, we acknowledge the controversy around that project for sure. A lot of these big ticket projects in the plan, are controversial in one way or the other. When it comes,
Well, that was convenient, Jacob. No, let me just say, and I think what he was going to say with the greenhouse gas rule itself is not, is not project specific, right? It's a regional, you got to remember, this is a planning exercise from our perspective. And, it's quite frankly, it is next to impossible to come to some determination on what a project may or may not do to greenhouse gases. It's from a modeling perspective, and I don't want to get real wonky here. It is basically, it is in, it's rounding error in the model for any change to any specific corridor or project or anything like that. So, so when we talk about specific projects, it's very tough. I mean, the couple big projects that we did remove from the plan, we truly do believe that there are opportunities there to mitigate some of the safety concerns and operational improvements in those corridors to help the flow of traffic in that area. And then, but thereby utilizing the money that was going to be used for capacity to help reconnect those neighborhoods, most notably in the central I-25 section. Jacob, I tried to cover long enough for you to get back on.
Yeah,
I did mention that it's not project specific, the greenhouse gas targets.
Okay, yeah, I'm so sorry I got kicked off from me. I had a beautiful answer that probably nobody heard, but hopefully you can hear me now.
Okay, well, because we're running a little bit behind, we're going to move to our next topic. We're going to change the order up a little bit, but you are both invited to stay, both for the next topics, and there are more questions in chat we didn't get to. If you have the ability to and interest in, we encourage you to engage in a little discussion there. Our next topic. Thank you very much. Our next topic is RTD Director Angie Rivera-Malpiede. She's nearing the end of her final term on the RTD board and has agreed to come chat with us from a unique perspective of somebody who's served on the board not only for a long period of time, but also through some really tumultuous periods and some successes, some challenges, and some ongoing challenges. And so I don't think there's a prepared presentation, but Director Malpiede, I'll just turn it over to you with the hope that we can talk about both the past and the future. Welcome.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you for inviting me. I have always thought of the INC in such high regards in terms of having their finger on the pulse of the community. So really, thank you so much for inviting me. I want to acknowledge Kate Williams, Director Williams, who I'm privileged to sit on this board with, and past board director Bill James. I would like this to be kind of an intimate conversation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And yes, I'd like to talk about the past, the present, and the future. I've been involved with RTD as a board director off and on since 2010. And in 2010, I was appointed by then Mayor John Hickenlooper to fill a seat that was vacated by Director Juanita Chacon. And I have to say that being on this board has changed my world. In 2010, RTD had just passed fast tracks. We started an innovative program, the WIN program, the Workforce Initiative. Now it became a national model, and I went to the White House because it was so innovative in terms of hiring community and building community wealth, as well as building out this amazing connection to the world called Fast Tracks. I was the secretary of the board at that time, and I was so privileged to sign the federal fund agreement to build out Fast Tracks. I didn't know how that was going to change, not just my world, but all of your world as well. I was on the board till 2014, and I like to tell people that I've experienced it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I was appointed, and then I ran and I was elected, and then I ran and I lost, and then I went through the 5 stages of grief, including being really angry that I didn't win. But those 4 years that I wasn't on the board really made me do some introspective and taught me a lot about who I was and why I was sitting on this amazing position of policy that could change the voice of my community. I ran again in 2019 and was voted in. And I knew that when I came back to RTD, there were so many issues that were happening. One was that folks did not think that RTD was transparent. They really were not happy. In fact, I kind of joke that my goal was to get Kyle Clark not to bash RTD on a nightly basis. But what I learned was so much deeper than that. I was so honored and privileged to be selected as the chairman of the board in 2020 and in 2021, which was also quite extraordinary, being voted in as chairman of the board on January 6th, and having the legislature invite me to a meeting on January 8th about the Senate bill to really kind of take over RTD. And from there, we had the issue with the end line not being ready, and people were extraordinarily angry. And then in March, the pandemic hit, and the world came to a screeching halt. But during that time, what I decided was the best course of action with the support of this amazing board of directors was to be inclusive, transparent, and willing to try whatever to work together in partnership. And so, as you know, the bill kind of went away because of the pandemic. And I talked about maybe it was time to bring back the Fiscal Sustainability Committee that was launched earlier and had experts coming in from outside to look at RTD's finances so that it could be a transparent process and the community would feel like they had more ability to see what was happening at RTD. From that point, the governor and the state legislature decided to put together an accountability committee, which I thought was a fabulous idea. And I asked that 2 board members be included as at large, that they wouldn't have voting powers, but that the board's representation would be there. I never sat on any of these committees because I really felt the need to empower the board of directors to bring in their expertise. And that, I think, was a really big turning point in terms of RTD. Today, you can go on our website and our finances are on the very front and they're extraordinarily user-friendly. And as I went down this road of the pandemic, it was probably the most surreal place to be in terms of making sure that as the chairman of the board, that I had a steady hand in an unsteady world that had never been seen before. We were dealing with issues such as, if you can remember, the pandemonium that was happening. At one point, they said the virus stayed on the bus for 20 minutes if you touched something, and people were panicking. Our bus drivers were terrified because they felt like they didn't have any protection, and our ridership plummeted from 360,000 a day to less than 10,000. And so what we found that we were doing was that we were being strategic and working with other transit agencies across the country and in consultation with the RTD board of directors about how do we move forward in this uneasy time? At the same time, our general manager retired early. And so we hired an interim general manager. And one of the big issues was trust of RTD. And so we chose not to utilize the succession plan, but to do a national search for an interim general manager. And we hired Paul Ballard, which I think was probably one of the greatest choices we've made. That this is a seasoned general manager CEO who had over 30 years of experience in all kinds of transit agencies across the country, but was not biased in Denver. Like nobody could say, oh, he's here because of blah. He came in and did a job. And his primary job was to open up the N line. And he did that in September. He was extraordinary in terms of helping me and guiding me through the most tumultuous time I think the world has ever seen, with a steady hand and understanding we were all going to get through this together, regardless of what was happening around us. I have to say, looking back on it, that it has been the most extraordinary experience of my life, not just in my career, but in my spirituality, of making sure that I needed to rise above all the chaos to make sure that our agency would be successful, and that all of our passengers, all of our key stakeholders, and all of our team and this amazing board of directors felt like we're going to be just fine, because it didn't feel just fine a lot of the time. And during that time, the board was extraordinarily courageous, because then we immediately launched another national search for our permanent CEO. And I have to tell you that during that time, I was working so many hours, I can't tell you what month it was or what day it was. I just knew that we were on a fast track and we needed to stay ahead of the storm. And I did not realize until we were doing the final interviews that the 3 finalists were women. That's how much I was so focused on just getting things done. And we made history. We hired the first woman in the history of RTD to be the CEO of this agency, and the first woman of color. And I was the first Latina to be the chairman of the board for this agency in 51 years. So I really felt this mission that I could not fail. I needed to be successful, and I needed to do it with diplomacy and integrity, even though it was excruciating difficult at times. As we were marching down this line, we did an entire systemic change of RTD. We really changed everything from the ground up. We did so many active peer reviews. We brought in a safety and security peer review with different chiefs of police from around the country to sit down with us to look at what we had, what was working, what wasn't working, and to advise us on how we needed to move forward. We did the same thing with our finances and our audit. We had a peer review for that. We looked at our communications department to make sure that we were on target and what was it that we needed to do. We were doing really in-depth work at the same time that all of this was going on. And we came up with a 5-year strategic plan. I'm really proud of it. What we did was we took all of the pieces that we had, and the board, along with the general manager, adopted it for the next 5 years. It has 4 main functions. Community value, oops, wrong glasses, sorry guys. Community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success. Everything we do falls under one of those buckets. We streamlined our ability to look at the policy that we were working on to make sure that we were serving the greatest need of the community. And as you know, we were also in the middle of Reimagine RTD. We were working on our system optimization plan, And we hired an equity and inclusion director to look at the entire system of RTD, which is no small feat since we are the 16th largest transit agency in the country. And so we were talking about some really serious pull your boots on work from the ground up. I will tell you that as I sit in this chair now, looking at not being on the board after December, I feel both relieved and sad and excited. I think that RTD has done an amazing job in light of all the adversity that they've had to face and all of the opinions that people have. Here's what I've learned. I've learned that running a transit agency is really damn hard work. It is a logistical nightmare. It is formula based, and it is serving such a diverse community that someone's always not going to feel like their voice is heard. I think that, you know, when you look at the work that RTD has done, the staff that we have in place are the experts, and the board comes in and it changes literally every 2 years. We are one of 3 boards in the country that are elected. The rest of the transportation boards across the country are appointed. That it is the responsibility of all of us together to make sure that we have the best damn transit agency in the country. And the reason why is because this is so much bigger than any one of us. We are here to serve our community. And for so many of our community members, our neighbors, our families, they rely on this transportation system to get them to and from their livelihoods. And without that, they're not going to exist. It is the economic backbone of this region. And it is the fundamental need that we have to provide that connects people to homes, to food, to medical services, to family, and to our jobs. Is so much bigger than us. And so I really have been thinking a lot about, as I'm winding down, what has it meant to me? I'm also a Transportation Management Association director. And so my whole world has been around transportation, mobility, connection, and inclusivity on every level, regardless of who you are or what language you speak or what economic status you come from, is that we should have the best transit agency in the country. I've learned that we need to do a lot more work. One of my biggest concerns is that we are not properly funded and supported by the state of Colorado. Other departments of transportation across the country get on the average of 23% of state funding for transit agencies. RTD gets 1%. We are so far behind that point that we need to figure out a way to get our legislature to take a look at this transit agency that is so important to the economic stability of this region, and get them the funding that they need to provide safe and reliable service to the entire region. I will also share with you my personal opinion is that in working at RTD on all of these issues, maybe it's time for RTD to take a look at who they are and what they do. And, you know, some people are shocked when I say this, but I'm really beginning to think that maybe RTD should become a regional service and partner with local communities and municipalities to provide the local service and the last mile. Because we cannot depend on one agency to provide so much service, especially since funding is based on the 1969 numbers. And today we have grown so much that that formula doesn't work anymore. And I think that for the good of the whole region, we as community members and key stakeholders need to ask that question and figure out how together we can come up with a plan of action that will in fact serve everybody in a fair and reliable, equitable place. But, you know, more than anything else, it's been an incredible honor and journey for me to be seated in this position and to have been the chair for 2 years. I think that it's going to take a minute for me to kind of really capture all of it, because there was so much that it's hard to put into words exactly the whole journey. I can give you pieces of it right now, but it has been it's been a wild ride for sure. And I think that RTD has an amazing future in terms of innovation and partnerships and the ability to think outside of the box. And as we're sitting here, the technology is changing before our very eyes. And, you know, it's all of these different pieces. It's like a jigsaw puzzle that we all have to work on together. But I think more importantly, we need to talk to each other to make sure we're hearing what needs to be done and how we can participate in this together. And that would be working with your board directors and making sure that people are running for the RTD board of directors that will represent your voice. I will share with you that we are in an election cycle in November, and we had 4 seats with nobody who running for those seats, and there are 4 write-ins. My district, District B, I can't remember, Shelley Cook's district and Peggy Catlin's district. I've never seen that happen for as long as I can remember. So I would just say to all of you in INC, you are the voice of the community. You are the key stakeholders, and you are the experts of what your community needs. And really what we need is for all of you to join the RTD Board of Directors to make sure that the policies that are being put in place are really the policies that need to be brought forward for the good of the community. And, you know, I'll just stop there.
Yeah, if we could go to a couple questions here. I get the sense that once you've stepped back from this for a couple months, you'll probably have a pretty powerful memo or letter or op-ed that you're going to write about. And now that you've synthesized everything, what you think should be explored next.
Yeah.
I'm just going to pick a couple questions from chat here. Of course, RTD runs the buses and trains, but it doesn't own the roads. So John Rickey has a question about the interaction with Denver. John?
What's one thing that Denver council or mayor could do to make RTD's job easier?
Well, I think that they're actually on the road of doing that. As you know, the city of Denver has funded the Montbello Connector, which is a first last mile service. And it has become so successful that they're going to be expanding that into the Globeville, Swansea, Elyria. My understanding is, you know, once that happens, it'll go into other parts of the community, in the Denver community. I think their Department of Transportation and Infrastructure was a huge step in showing that Denver's at the table to move forward to work with RTD as well as other jurisdictions to really provide a robust transportation service. So I think we're on the road for it, quite frankly.
Thank you. We have a question from David Mincer about funding opportunities. David?
Hi, sorry, I'm going to pull over.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge clearly seems to be a lack of funding for both operations and capital. And when the state legislature was drafting their transportation, their $5 billion bill last year, RTD seemed mostly absent from that conversation. I was wondering, did the RTD board reach out to the legislature to look for funding, and how maybe going forward, how might they approach the politics of getting funding aside from asking for a tax raise, which seems more unlikely?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We were surprised we weren't in that conversation as well. We wanted to be in that conversation. And that was not the choice of the governor. We have, pardon?
No, sorry, you say you should have. RTD should have inserted themselves, made themselves heard in that conversation. You can't kind of wait to be asked and
Oh,
invited.
no. We've been at the table at every point.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we have tried to do that, but I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Well, going forward, since that, that didn't work out, how might we approach the politics to try to get funding from the state, given, it wasn't successful last time around?
I think that I would look to all of you to reach out to the legislature asking for additional funding for RTD as well. I mean, I think it's going to take all of us to be at the table and calling our legislature and our legislators in the governor's office asking for the regional transportation district to get funding. It is something that we are consistently working on and providing information. We really are a good partner, and we will try getting at the table at any point. So know that we're not being shy about it, but we clearly have had some obstacles.
Yeah, I email my rep at every opportunity to ask for more funding. So I hope you all get it.
Thank you so much.
Keith Meyer picked up on your thoughts about a future vision for shared transit operations. Keith, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I think mine just kind of follows up on the last one as well, is just, what would your proposals be for other funding sources from local communities, or a different state model of funding for RTD as well? It seems like the state's, very passionate about reducing greenhouse gas emissions,
Right.
But sometimes, I guess, is not making the link to transportation and the need for more public transportation dollars.
Kate, thank you for that question. So 2 things. The first one is that I absolutely agree with you. I think that public transit is the #1 opportunity we have to get the most cars off the street. I mean, clearly, hands down, that is it. We were not part of that bill. We wish we were, but we were not included in that. But the other big issue that RTD is facing, and it's not just RTD, it's every other industry that has drivers as a main component, is we don't have people applying for jobs to be bus operators or train operators. And in fact, the RTD Board of Directors just passed unanimously a robust CBA with the union. And the union was so excited about the agreement that they held a press conference. We are still dealing with the lack of people applying for those positions. But as I said, it is a huge issue across the country. And in fact, Jefferson County Schools just eliminated 29 bus routes to schools because they don't have enough drivers. So we are doing a robust recruitment. We're holding job fairs all over the place. We're doing $4,000 signing bonuses, because as you know, we want to provide safe and reliable service. But if we don't have drivers, then we can't drive. That's the first thing. The second thing is, on the A line, you'll hear that sometimes the A line is not running. It is probably because we don't have 2 officers on each train, and without 2, we cannot run. And so we are mandated by so many different rules and regulations that we have to adhere to, that I think the general public does not know that we have to do.
Yeah, that's a fascinating dual constraint. There's the financial constraint, and then even if you have the money, the operators.
Yes.
It makes it hard. I mean, unless we see an end to that, unless that's temporary, it makes it hard to imagine alternate futures with multiple transit operators, because you'd all be competing for the same pool of people who might potentially want to drive. I'm not sure why multiple would be able to bring more people out to select those jobs than one would, but we have to be exploring options. We'll end with a question from Richard Crane here, really getting to how to make transit work more effectively. Richard?
Thanks, Angie, for your time, for all your input. And I have to tell you, I just love transit. I use it as much as I can. I probably ride my bike more than anything else. But sometimes the reality is it's such a pain to get around town. I mean, from my house to Cherry Creek, it takes me an hour and a half on a bus. Well, that's, I can ride it in 20 minutes in my car. And you and I know that transit adds so much value to a city. I mean, throughput of single occupancy vehicles just adds nothing. So I live on 17th Street, so I'm really familiar with, 13th, 14th, 15th, 6th, 17th, and 18th. They're one-way roads where people just, they're very dangerous. People fly down the roads. And I've talked to multiple businesses along those roads, and they've been very positive about turning them into two-way roads so people would slow down and linger and walk. But if we had more dedicated roads or lanes within those roadways, that would be so much better for the buses. I'm not sure why we in Denver don't do more of that.
That's actually a great question. Director Williams and I have both participated in the event that they have annually where you go from Union Station to Civic Center by 3 modes: walking, biking, or transit. And I did the transit and we lost by a lot.
Yeah,
Sure.
I won.
Yeah, the whole event was over and people were waiting for us on the bus because we were stuck in traffic. Denver has since then put in bus-only lanes on 15th, and I think we're going to need to see more of that happening in order for the buses to not get caught up in traffic jams, and then it provides a much more expedient kind of service that will get us from point A to point B. We have a lot of work to do in our community in terms of infrastructure, not to mention e-bikes, and do we have charging stations? So I think we need to look at everything. We need to look at street calming mechanisms in different areas of the community, of what the community feels needs to be done that makes you feel safe, and then what can make our transit systems be more reliable and efficient without being impeded by construction or traffic or both. So I think that you're on the right track, and it's something that I look forward to working with everybody on as a community member.
Well, this is a great point to jump to our next presentation at, because we had DRCOG talking about, with their reprioritized 2050 plan, more emphasis on bus rapid transit, prioritizing some of our major corridors. You're just calling for it because we know it makes transit predictable. And it's inherently fair because these vehicles carry many more people than individual cars do. And then our next speaker is David Krutzinger. David Krutzinger is Director of Transit for Denver's Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. And he's going to bring us up to date, not only on East Colfax, but the entire system of bus rapid transit that we envisioned in Denver Moves Transit. David, I've made you co-host and you are able to share your screen.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, transportation leaders throughout the community. Appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit more. And the conversation that you were just having, I think, is very appropriate to that. So let me go into presentation mode, make sure you guys can all see that. Is that looking good on your end?
Looks great.
All right. So I'm going to bookend this by starting with the sort of the vision, the answer up front, walk through some details, and then we'll get to the second part. So we'll start with the Denver Moves Transit Vision. We've been working on that for a while. There was a prior iteration that was truly sort of a vision document in 2019, and we've provided an implementation plan for that over the last year and a half of work. And then I'll talk about East Colfax Bus Rapid Transit, update you on that, and then we'll end with Federal Boulevard, our next corridor. So here's a quick snapshot, what you all were just talking about through 2021. We have bus priority lanes, painted stripes in some places on Broadway and Lincoln, and then downtown we have the red painted transit lanes on 15th and 17th, as Director Rivera-Malpiede was mentioning. We'd like to do more of that, and that's what the very light green lines on this map are indicating, is that we'd like to do more of those priority treatments. Between now and 2027, we are on the verge of starting construction on the East Colfax Bus Rapid Transit Corridor, a $250 million investment. And then starting Federal Boulevard into design and environmental clearance a couple of years behind that one, so that we would have 2 corridors completed by 2030. And then looking out to 2040, we'd like to have more corridors, including Colorado Boulevard and the Spear Elitesdale corridor completed as well by 2040. And certainly, I think if you had the presentation from DRCOG before this, you had you've been given the importance to air quality, and some of these will meet those air quality needs. Some of these corridors in the blue color, we think don't have as high ridership as the ones in purple. And so they would be completed at a Denver local level, probably with a more modest investment of Denver funds, since they wouldn't meet regional or Federal Transit Administration criteria for additional funding. We are currently working to put this plan in front of our city council to get a final nod on the recommendations, and then we'll be publishing that report. So Colfax, we're excited to talk about where we're at. We've been branding, doing station refinement, streetscape, doing a little bit of traffic work, and we are preparing to accelerate the corridor delivery by 1.5 to 2 years over what we have out there publicly. So I'll get into that in a moment. Just a quick rundown of those things. Colfax went through an extensive naming process. We had 40-something names considered, whittled down through many tiers of public involvement input over time to the name links, sort of both a local creature on the Colorado landscape, as well as a play on words for linking transportation linkages. And then the artistic team has worked to create logos. We started with about 11 different ways of envisioning the cat, either the full body, the head, different versions of that, and have gotten it down to these 4. They're currently under consideration with RTD and other partners. Many of you have seen some of the earlier station designs. These are the latest sort of refinements, starting to put a little more detail to it. Again, we're only partway through this. This is 30% design. We have not considered paint colors or other treatments, such as brick or other materials that you might think of that could make it fit more in the context in different places in the corridor with the adjacent architecture. And so that's some of the feedback that we've gotten, with these stark white looking canopies, nice, but maybe a little too modern in some locations. There is the precedent, of course, with Denver Union Station, the tent right behind the historic building, and things like the Millennium Bridge, things like that have the same white architecture. So that's where that was drawn from. But we do believe that it could be made to fit the community better. I don't think anybody's telling us to just turn it all federal green either, because it would look a little heavy if it was all solid federal green, like a trash receptacle or something like that. So we have a little work to go, and that'll be part of the work that we do going forward. Prior plans have said, this is not just, we're not just throwing a transit project on the corridor. We are integrating this as part of the community, so it needs to serve the community. We've got a lot of prior neighborhood level plans that say what the neighborhoods want, how bicycle and pedestrian networks, how architecture, how permitted development, redevelopment should occur. So we'll be spending the time during now through 2023, getting from 30% design to 60+% design, headed towards final design completion in early 24. So we'll be looking at streetscaping treatments, as I said, colors, pavement types, adding trees, street furniture, things to sit on, bike racks, and other things like that, that all need to be integrated into the stations that aren't so far in these initial designs to just get the concept down. Traffic-wise, this is one other outstanding item that we have. We need to spend some time with the community on. We know that this will reduce crashes on the corridor by implementing this and having the bus lanes in the middle, so you prevent a lot of left turn crashes, a lot of other types of crashes by channelizing things and having more of the car movements at fully signalized intersections than at intersections in between those. The ridership will increase 24 to 30% and will reduce a lot of vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gases with that. We need to go through and do a full-blown curbside access plan. So one of the bit of the feedback from the community is, we're pretty okay with this, but we want to know how our deliveries work. We want to know how many parking spaces you're taking exactly, if you're taking spaces, which there will be some parking spaces removed. On Colfax, what does that mean for people parking in the neighborhood, and how are those neighborhood spaces shared? And so this effort would be to work with neighborhoods and businesses to make sure we have a workable plan. As we looked at the total number of parking spaces, there's very few locations in the corridor that there's not enough parking within a couple of blocks of Colfax itself. It's just how they get used and when they get used, and making sure, as in some parts of the corridor, neighbors can get home after work and still have a place to park in front of their own house and not be blocks away when they're carrying bags of groceries.
In their own garage.
Right. Or have cars parked in front of your own garage. Exactly. And then we know that by taking lanes on Colfax, that will mean a little bit less car travel. I think we've shown through a lot of work. It's not going to blow up the corridor. It's not going to be Carmageddon, traffic disaster. On average, people will experience about 3 minutes of extra delay based on how people travel in the corridor. Most people don't use Colfax end to end as their way of getting around. They use other streets, and then in the last couple of miles of their trip, they tend to then turn and go along Colfax to their final destination. All right. So that's the Colfax update. Not on a slide, but I did mention we are trying to accelerate this project. We are about to release a request for proposals in the next couple of weeks after we get RTD approval. We're a subrecipient to RTD for federal funds, so we need to make sure we are a good subrecipient to RTD and don't cause them any heartburn by the way that we manage the federal funds that would pass through RTD. So that said, we think we're a few weeks away from releasing a request for proposals for an owner's rep, and about a month or so out from releasing the construction manager general contractor request for proposal. What that does then is, if we get positive responses on both of those, then we expect to have a construction manager general contractor say, we can accelerate this project by 18 months and deliver it by the end of 26 instead of delivering it sometime in the middle of 2028. So I'll share that with you guys. I didn't want to put it in print because this is all based on what responses we get back from industry. We've had tremendous industry interest to date. We've had some pre-proposal meetings and things like that with them. And tremendous industry interest. So we think we'll be able to accelerate this, but want to, I guess, announce that once we have those things. The other thing is the economy's a little wonky with supply chain issues, and so this the industry could tell us that they can accelerate it 18 months, no problem, but there might be a price tag that goes with that. And so what this construction manager general contractor process allows us to do is get to 60%, 90%, and each of those milestones will have a price check with with our construction contractor. And if they continue to be able to stay within budget, then at the end of the final design process, they will be awarded the construction contract. If they're not able to stay within the budget by having this over-the-shoulder partnership roll over the last part of the design period, then we have the right to conclude that agreement and move out to open bidding, which could push it back out to 2028. So there's some risks, but we're doing everything we can to accelerate it. So I'll take any quick questions on that before I launch into all the other things.
Well, I think we should just move through it and talk about the citywide thing. Zoom back from Colfax and help us connect this to what we just heard from Dr. Cog.
All right, so our Denver Moves transit plan is a combination of bus stop improvements, bus priority treatments, bus service, and bus rapid transit. It's sort of heavy capital. On the bus stop improvement front, I don't have a lot of slides on this, but we'll just say that we've had a parallel effort as we're wrapping up Denver Moves Transit to look at 2,800 bus stops within the city and county of Denver out of RTD's total of about 11,000 across the entire region. You can see on the screen all the things that we're using to prioritize them. Our vision for bus stop improvements is that every bus stop should have at least a concrete pad that connects you from the street across the tree lawn to the sidewalk and a bench, a place to sit while you're waiting for the bus. And then based on other things, the amount of ridership, where you are in the city, whether there's a tree canopy or not. Certainly high ridership locations get you the most amenities. Mid-level ridership locations that might not have a tree canopy might still warrant some sort of sunscreen or shelter, if you will. And so we intend to improve. We've been improving 20 to 50 bus stops per year, and we'd like to see if we can accelerate that. Certainly, if we only do it at a rate of 50 per year, and we've got 2,800, even accounting for some that RTD already has out there in good shape, it'll take us 30 or 40 years to meet those standards. So we've got work to do ahead of us. Bus priority network study. We know we can't do bus rapid transit in every corridor. It's not appropriate. We don't have the money. And so we've looked at all the places across the network where there's an opportunity to speed up the buses. And this is a map looking at 270 different segments that fell out of all of the corridors within Denver. These are all the places that we can do pieces or longer corridors. Some of these will you'll recognize Colorado Boulevard, probably lines up to just be a BRT rather than a whole bunch of little itty bitty intersection improvements and queue jumps and things like that. But you see throughout the network, there's a lot of other places that there could be queue jumps, signal improvements, take a lane for a half a block or a block to provide some more throughput at important locations. We know for 2022, we are putting in motion looking at expanding downtown priority. So design of these corridors to complement the 15th and 17th red painted lanes out there. And we are also going to be looking at 17th and 18th. All right, so that was bus stops and bus priority, bus service. 2022, we are expanding our Montbello service, which is the top image to the left of the dashed box. We're going to add Gateway neighborhood, which is in the dashed box, and are proposing to also add Globeville, Elyria, Swansea with another 3 vehicles in that neighborhood to expand our what we originally called Montbello connector, but I guess with this many neighborhoods, we might need to just call it the Denver connector, complementing the RTD service that's out there. So we are partway through the city council process and are going to both do these expansions and extend the contract for 2 more years. So we'd be operating in this area through 2024 with an option to also add parts of West Denver in the late 2023 through 2024 time period. All right, so this maybe brings us back to what you saw from Dr. Cog, regional BRT development. I think this is current working proposal by CDOT to add, and with a lot of DRCOG input, to add 3 more bus rapid transit corridors by the end of the decade as an aspirational goal. So the green horizontal line with a little kink in the downtown area is the East Colfax BRT project that we've already covered. Blue line on the left is Federal Boulevard bus rapid transit. And with apologies for my tardiness today, I was filling in for an Inglewood city member who was not able to make a presentation to their transportation advisory committee to see what Inglewood position would be in joining this effort. So it's an 18-mile corridor from 120th and Federal all the way down to Dartmouth and Denver. The outcome of tonight's meeting was a support letter. Inglewood was feeling like they were a little bit late in their budget process to automatically provide funding tonight, but they were pretty interested in looking at that over the rest of the fall and then maybe making some budget changes in early 23. And then the other 2 quarters, the red line is Colorado Boulevard from 40th and Colorado Station along the A line down to the Evans, Colorado Station just south of I-25. And then finally, the yellow line out east is Far East Colfax from I-225 to 470. So here's what we're doing with Federal. We've been building a coalition over the summer. And what we're trying to do is get a TIP application to put Federal into 30% design in NEPA in 2023, 2024. Based on the timing of the DRCOG application, this will all shift about a half a year to the right. So we'll start mid-23 if awarded funding, and then complete by 2030. And the corridor looks like this, a little bit closer up. 49% of it is in the city of Denver. And you can see the percentages sort of based on a mileage and street frontage area of the other partners. Westminster is committed $1 million. Adams County is committed $1 million. Federal Heights is committed $200,000, and RTD has committed $1 million. So we are well on our way towards. If our target was a $6 million match, I think we'll get to 5.7 and ask for $4 million in TIP funds for a $10 million study. I should say study is probably the wrong word. Design and environmental clearance, so that we can, by the middle of the decade, go to the Federal Transit Administration for another small start grant and have this constructed by the end of the decade. Certainly with CDOT and DRCOG's emphasis in solving greenhouse gas problems, we all collectively hope to get 2 more quarters, but this is the detail we have for this one. We'll work with partners CDOT and DRCOG and RTD to see what we can do to advance the other 2 that were on the map, this map. All right, so that's the quick rundown of a whole lot of things in a short amount of time.
Okay. Well, we are, just because of the schedule changes, we are running a little behind. I'm going to ask people if they can do this, just a few questions, lightning round. So fast question, and then David, if you would, fast answer. David Menser has a question about Spear.
I wanted to specifically ask about Spear Elite Sail BRT, because there was a study in 2017 that was completed and kind of sat on the shelf and even went backwards when CDOT put some concrete barriers in the median where the bus is supposed to run. But I'm just wondering, why do we need to wait 20 years to put that bus in when there are other projects like the I-25 Broadway $80 million highway ramp are going forward? It's disappointing that this bus line is going to take so long. I was wondering if that could be moved up, given we have a plan in place.
I think it's all based on funding. So even for Federal, the city would need to bond to provide our match. It's not currently bonded, and so we would need to do another bond measure around 25, 26 to provide the match funding. So if we wanted to do another corridor, we would just need to make that pitch by that time.
So we can do more in parallel with more funding.
Correct.
So we need to vote wisely for leaders coming up here soon. Jonathan Pira has a question about east to west on Colfax.
I might abbreviate just because we have time and wonder how I can get more details about some specifics of these proposals. I've found a couple particularly related to my neighborhood have changed, and yet I've been unable to find details about how or when or why or what some of these maps mean. So I'm wondering how and where we can dig into some more of these details.
Yeah, just reach out to me. My contact information is on the screen. Our intent this fall and going into early 23 is to sit down with business improvement districts in the East Colfax area one at a time and be around a table together with people's comments about traffic and station locations and design and all that stuff. And just
okay, yeah, I'll reach out. I'm actually on the West Colfax side, but yeah, we'll reach out regardless.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. Lucia Brown has a question about Lincoln Broadway. Lucia, are you there? Maybe I'll just sort of fill in. Lincoln Broadway, of course, is a corridor identified for BRT, and it would seem like, given the width of Broadway, there's less impairment to do. I know there's some dedicated lanes now, but it's not bubbling up to the top of the list. It's not on your slide. Where is that in the scheme of things?
Broadway, Lincoln is further out in the 2040 to 2050 horizon, and acknowledging that the priority lanes are already in place to Broadway at 25. That certainly, like others, could be moved up if we found money sooner, or if there were partnerships with Inglewood that would take care of the southern part of Broadway on an earlier horizon.
Okay. DRCOG was just talking about how it was one of the ones they'd targeted in their reprioritization. So hopefully that helps pull down money. Is that the right way to think about it?
I think that's a good way to think about it. And it's the second highest ridership bus corridor in the region after Colfax.
Yeah. So going where people want to go, get big ridership. And I'm just going to pick one more because we're about 5 minutes over. I know there's questions here, and you may want to stay in chat. There's very specific questions about East Colfax impacts to side streets, some of which is, of course, been covered in those meetings. But pick another question here. Oh, we had the question come up during our conversation with DRCOG about the definition of BRT. It's a very flexible definition, but at some point it could flex too much, and you have a branded bus that's stuck in traffic like any other bus. So what kind of backstop is there on what you're going to brand BRT, what level of service prioritization, and for the person riding reliability does it need to have to get this moniker?
Yeah, so in terms of federal funding, the definition of BRT is it has to have dedicated lanes with at least 15-minute frequency service all day long, and in the peak 10-minute or better frequencies. So it is not from a federal funding standpoint, it is not a loose definition. It is a pretty high bar to meet. In terms of our community lines that I showed earlier on the map in blue, we'd certainly be looking at things like what you see out there on 8th Avenue to provide the bus priority during congested times, but leave those lanes open for general use or for parking on the weekends. So that's how we would implement the community bus rapid transit corridors.
Okay, so then there's a question dangling out there about Aurora not having dedicated lanes and how that fits the federal model and where you're able to use the federal money. Is that a good assumption?
So you have to have more than 50% of the corridor with dedicated lanes. And so Aurora is, to some extent, is riding Denver's coattails. They recently made a commitment to provide some station improvements, which is another one of the bars that you have to meet for the quality of the stations and the amount of information for passengers and branding and things like that. So Aurora has all the branding and all of the passenger information systems at their stations, even though they don't have the dedicated lanes. So we're providing
I think we've got Oh yeah, I think we've got a room full of people here wanting something that's really going to work well on all these corridors, so that people choose to use it if it's reliable. That's fantastic. Mr. Christian, thanks so much for joining us. You are leading this work, but it's clear how many other groups are coordinating and lining up. DRCOG and RTD and CDOT, because a lot of these roads are owned by CDOT. So thanks for pushing this forward for Denver.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, if you'd like to stay and answer any more questions in the chat, please do. We're now going to turn to a little different topic, bike advocacy. We have a couple speakers here from the Denver Bicycle Lobby, Alan Calgill and Nicole McSpirit. Alan, are you going to be driving the slides?
I think I'll be speaking tonight. This is Alan's presentation, but he's got a case of laryngitis.
Okay. And Nicole, should I let you share your screen?
Alan's actually going to run the screen sharing, and I will be doing the talking if that works out okay.
Let's go for it.
Sweet. So yeah, Nicole McSpirit and Alan Calgill here. Thank you very much for letting us come and talk to you about neighborhood bikeways and why we see that they actually have a pretty good potential to build out our high comfort network of bike routes in Denver. And basically what are bikeways? They're facilities on smaller side streets. They are meant to be shared spaces. There's no dedicated space for people on bikes to separate them from cars, but they tend to be on quieter streets, lower volume, lower speeds. So that's the benefit of them as they currently are. And we're using them mainly is because they're low cost, pretty quick to build. We've seen a lot of our plans go from protected bike lanes to neighborhood bikeways. And we think that that's okay in some regards. They can be done. And it's a great opportunity for this 5-year goal to build out our 125 miles of high comfort bike lanes. And what we like about neighborhood bikeways is the potential to bike on these quieter side streets. Again, lower volume, lower speeds. As we've seen with our heat wave, they tend to be shadier, a little bit slower paced. So great for newbie bicyclists or families wanting to get around. In their current iteration, though, they aren't quite as comfortable as we would like to see them. We've taken a few polls and they typically show similar results, that they're not high comfort. They're, could be mostly a few streets or just fine. And then you get one driver who kind of ruins that for you. So the issue is really trying to get the volume reduced on these neighborhood bikeways. And we've all seen the sharrows, and that's basically what our neighborhood bikeways are these days, the basic paint markings, which are great for wayfinding, but they don't improve safety. A lot of the newer dotty plans also include paint and plastic bulb outs, chicanes, pinch points, which I don't believe anyone really cares for. They end up creating more conflict between bicyclists and drivers, pushing them together. We've all seen, drivers trying to pass us quickly before they get to those pinch points or chicanes. It can be a lot better. The issue is that we really need to truly prioritize bicyclists on these streets. So what we're calling for in one word is diverters. And these are basically to filter off car volume. So neighbors, delivery drivers can still get to homes. People still can park in front of their homes. It doesn't remove any parking, but it just eliminates through traffic. We are using some of our neighborhood bikeways have a diverter or two. They aren't used nearly frequently enough to truly reduce the volume on these streets. They are great when they are done correctly, and truly kind of make it possible for bicyclists to feel comfortable. And again, we've shown more and more with these surveys that people really, the number one choice for these neighborhood bikeways to make them comfortable are diverters. And I think we get one of the reasons why they would be easier and quicker to implement is because you're going to have a lot less pushback from residents because they're not losing parking. Most people actually really like less, car traffic on their streets, even if you are a driver. So there's less of that antagonism involved. But we've seen ones that don't work. So we've kind of learned what does work and what doesn't work. These on Bayard don't work. Anything that drivers can kind of ignore. We do see them doing that. So it really has to be something that's clear and obvious that this is a bike priority street, and you need to kind of, are you going to play the video? Or here's a picture from a diverted bikeway. They call it a greenway in San Luis Obispo, where my daughter goes to school. This is her bike in the photo on the greenway. I get to zip around slow. And this is a greenway that has diverters every 2 blocks. And I've ridden it maybe 24 times. I've only seen 1 vehicle driving on it and getting diverted off of it. And so like the real genius of these diverters is not really the diverting the traffic off. It just makes it a bit less desirable to drive on. So you see anyone who doesn't have to be on that street avoids it, and they take other routes, which, because people are coming from different directions, it doesn't divert all the traffic to 1 or 2 streets. It diffuses the traffic and creates this really incredible, comfortable bikeway. And you can see these kind of what I call super shallow markings. They're a bit more pronounced. They really kind of give the bicyclist a feel that this is your street. Cars are kind of guests in this area. Although, you see cars there, you see people living there. They're able to get in and out of their houses without problems. It just becomes a much more comfortable space for everyone. And so what we would like to change is we would like to see Dottie get feedback from the people who bike. As we've shown, the current versions of bikeways are not comfortable, and we're the ones riding them. We see a great potential for these, and the fact that if we could put diverters in every 2 or 3 blocks, that eliminates a lot of other paint and post infrastructure, which no one likes. I mean, people don't want them on their streets, so we get a lot of pushback from residents saying they don't want this kind of temporary looking infrastructure on their streets. And we can see that not only would diverters be more palatable to a lot of people, but they would just be more impactful. So please, if you're interested, we have a letter to sign to the mayor and Dottie. And we also, I wanted to say, one of the reasons why this has kind of become obvious that it's a good option. We have other links here, but a lot of us ride on what we call, or what is known as Denver bike streets. And this is a network created by Avi Stopper that maps out all the neighborhood streets that are comfortable to ride on. I mean, we all kind of know the streets in our own neighborhood that we can go and ride on and feel comfortable. But when you go out of your own neighborhood, it's not always easy to find those streets. So we already have this network kind of mapped out that people are already using. And we think many more people would actually use them if they had these diverters and clear wayfinding markings so that people can get out there and feel comfortable riding. So I appreciate your time. I don't know if there was anything else I needed to cover there, Alan. I know you probably can't talk to let me know, but I'm glad to take some questions. Hopefully I can answer them.
We're gonna treat this as a short topic and not spend a lot of time here, but please use the link that Alan just put in the chat. This is a more sophisticated look at this than I was doing. I've told people, Sharrows don't make a neighborhood bikeway, and you've taken a more sophisticated look at it and said Sharrows plus another
Yes.
couple steps can make it the kind of neighborhood street that the INC transportation platform it calls for, minimizing cut-through traffic and on neighborhood streets and having them be calm. And I think the term it used was, oh, now I'm forgetting. It's traffic calming, but there was another term for it that we used back when we did that platform. So what you're illustrating about the ones that work is very, very much in line with that. So I would encourage everyone who sees this more nuanced look at praising what works and asking for improvements on what doesn't work to follow the link and add your name.
And I would have never believed how well they work without riding them. It truly is something that I think is a huge bang for our buck and would be easily implementable.
Okay, and it was on the screen for people who watched the video again, but if they missed it, bit.ly/Denver Better Bikeways is the sign-on letter. Thanks so much, and Nicole for presenting. Alan, hope your laryngitis gets better soon.
Thank you very much for your time.
For our final topic, we've invited back Danny Katz, Executive Director of COPERG. Also in this sort of advocacy section with a new announcement of a new coalition for looking at transportation much more seriously across the broader Denver metro area. And I won't try to steal your thunder, Danny. Tell us about the new alliance.
Great, thanks. Glad to be here again. Glad to see so many people focused in on ways to improve our transportation system. I got a big old fan behind me, so just let me know if you can't hear me right now. I'm Danny Katz. I'm the director of COPERG, the Colorado Public Interest Research Group. If you're not familiar with us, we work on a wide range of issues. Speaking up for a safer and healthier Colorado, looking to allow people to be freer to pursue their own individual well-being as well as the common good. We work on public health issues, transportation, consumer protection. I'm here today to talk to you about a new coalition called the Alliance to Transform Transportation. I'll put into the chat here, and sorry, I'm not good at double duty. So let me pause what I'm saying and copy and paste in here. This is the vision, the mission, the sort of value statement of this new coalition. So there's 10 of us that are working together right now. We're working to build a broader coalition that looks at transportation from a variety of different perspectives. So it includes COPERG, it includes the Denver Streets Partnership, which I also chair. It includes the Servicios de Raza, SWEEP, which is an energy efficiency group, Cross Disability Coalition, Conservation Colorado, Green Latinos, the ATU, which is the union for a number of the drivers and operators in the RTD system, NRDC, and Bicycle Colorado. And the idea here is to work to build grassroots support for significantly increasing investments in our transportation system, specifically on the, creating more options. So whether it's transit, walking, biking, rolling, how do we do that? And we just came off of the Fare Free Transit Month, and I did a lot of, riding buses and trains during the month. And I think to me, it's pretty clear that if we're going to hit our goals, whether they're climate goals, air pollution goals, safety goals, mobility goals, accessibility goals, affordability goals, whatever, that we need to significantly increase the support that goes into these expanded options. In particular, we're zeroing in on transit. And when we say transit, we're really focused in on the bus system, which we think is kind of the core part of the transit system right now, and just hasn't had the kind of investment that the train system has recently. And so we're looking at ways to significantly increase the investments that go into that and the things that support it. So in writing in the last month, it's really clear that, you know, to have a good transit system, not only do you need fast and frequent and reliable buses and trains, but you also need all the services that come with them. The stops are really, really key. So I think that's part when you sort of see us define how we think about transit, we think about the things that go into ensuring that the experience is a good experience, that people are able to ride in comfort and dignity. And so that's a big part of it. And then, as we've heard numerous times, if we want to expand our transit system, staffing is a huge part of this. And so, you know, being able to have the people who are really the ones making sure that the system is moving is critical as well. And so the goal here was really to use the Fare Free Transit Month to build momentum. And I think we did. I thought there was a lot of new people who rode. We're waiting for the ridership data to come out sometime in mid-November. But I think everyone who rode acknowledges there was a bump, there was an increase. And so it's taking that momentum and recognizing that 1 month of free transit doesn't transform the system. What we really need is, you know, more investments, policies that help shift dollars into that transit, walking, biking space, as well as figuring out ways to raise new dollars. We've got kind of a 2-year vision. So we're looking, you know, what can we do in the next 2 years, because the clock is running. You know, if we start putting policies in place in 2030, we're going to miss, you know, a lot of the goals that we have. So it's really, what can we do in the next 2 years? How can we do something big and bold? And, you know, we talked a little bit about how do we make sure we're not wasting dollars in highway expansion projects, which, you know, the data has shown time and again, it doesn't solve congestion. It adds more pollution. It adds more cars. It adds, you know, it doesn't get at our safety issues. So how do we shift some of those dollars away, like, you know, CDOT is proposing to do with I-25 in the center of Denver? How do we shift some of those dollars? But then how do we find new dollars, new investments, new ways to crank this up? Our hope is that our coalition will build. So we don't think that these 10 groups are the only 10 groups that care about this. At some point we had to go, you know, we had to sort of say we exist and this is what we've been talking about and thinking about. So we did. We're certainly looking for other voices, but we want to be, you know, strategic in how we grow. The last thing we want to do is just create yet another group that then is the exact same group as some other group. I mean, I've certainly had that experience where you go to a meeting and you're like, wait, I was just with all of you people in a different meeting. So ideally, we're doing something new. We're getting some new voices in. And as we grow, we're hopefully being, you know, strategic about growing in that way. And then we'll certainly, you know, there's going to need to be a lot of what we're doing now is just going out and talking to groups like this and saying, we've got a vision, we've got a set of groups, we care about this. And, you know, what do you think? What do you know, does this feel like we're on the right track? Do you want to be a part of this? Do you want to, you know, do you want to help us grow this? The thing we don't have right now is the lines on the map. So I can't tell you this is exactly where a new bus should go, and this is exactly how often it should run, and we're not there yet. We really are just going, here are our values, and then let's figure out in the next year if we can come together on some policies or some proposals, and then really kind of move those forward and ramp those up, whether it's at the legislature, whether it's local governments, whether it's via, you know, new funding. Those are all kind of on the table. So general, broad, but if you take a look at that link, you'll get a better sense, I think, of who we are. And if you're interested in, you know, learning more or, you know, supporting this in some way, or you want to give us some feedback, I'll put my email in the chat here. And then obviously, if you're part of any of the other groups that are listed there, feel free to talk to them about their perspective and why they were involved. So I'll stop there and happy to take questions if there's time.
Great. So a lot of these groups, including yours, are very skilled at talking with legislators and, you know, building alliances, but building alliances outside and inside the folks who are making legislation, setting the policies, referring to the voters, funding opportunities. I'm picking up that this is very much going to be focused on decision makers, having a big alliance, focus on changing the conversation in a big way. Is that fair?
I think there's been a criticism that sometimes transportation policy is sort of starts at the decision maker level and then sort of is baked there, and then sort of folks have a chance to weigh in, and at the tail end, or if it's on the ballot or whatnot. And we've seen some previous proposals use that strategy. I think we're really trying to use more of a grassroots strategy. So really starting with groups, we know all those mayors, chambers of commerce, whatever they are, they're going to be really important to anything that happens. Transportation impacts us all. But at this point, it's really kind of focused more on the grassroots groups. We're not working with RTD yet, even though they're the big transit provider. There's, there's ways that we could work together with RTD. It could be a local government strategy. I missed part of David's presentation, but some cities, Boulder in particular, has kicked in money, and there's ways that local governments can drive this. So yeah, we're trying to be very purposeful as a grassroots strategy and really get a base and make sure that, in particular, transit riders have weighed in on this. Sometimes we build transit systems that aren't always the most accessible or effective for the people who use it the most, and so just making sure we don't miss any of that early in the game before we get to those major decision making points where you do come together with legislators or city governments or chambers of commerce, wherever they may be.
Great. Well, it's an impressive starter group, and when you get to the point of influencing decision makers, you've got the right people at the table, starting at the grassroots, who have that familiarity. I really see a lot of power in what you're pulling together here.
And just want to emphasize, we definitely see some gaps in our coalition too. So feel free to let us know, hey, you're missing this constituency or that constituency. We very much acknowledge we're not perfect yet.
Great. I see Director Kate Williams has her hand up.
Thank you, Joel. I'm going to point out, Danny, that in the rest of the world, most of the population does not own a car. People who are immigrants and refugees in the Denver area are accustomed to using public transportation. And if you're really looking at the grassroots level, you need to go to talk to some of those community groups, African American Center, the mosques, the people who have for all of their lives used public transportation and understand it. And to them, RTD is safe, clean, and mostly on time. So I think you could get a lot of grassroots supports if you looked at that constituency. Thanks, Joel.
Thanks, Kate. And yeah, one thing that's kind of unique about Denver, which some of you might have noticed, we don't have a very strong, robust, organized transit riders group. A lot of cities already have that. So part of the theory here is maybe we can help build that. And to your point, Kate, I mean, that's part of the reason we have Servicios de la Raza there, more kind of in the service sector, who work with a lot of the people you were describing. It has been interesting as we've done outreach. There's a lot of groups that are professional groups. They have paid staff people. They're able to come to meetings all the time. We're trying our best not to pack the room with folks who are already, again, at all these tables. And it's been hard to recruit some of those newer groups that represent some of the constituencies you were describing, because they've got limited time and limited focus, and transportation is oftentimes not the number one issue for any one group. It's actually usually a high issue, but there's very few kind of transportation groups. So we've actually approached a lot of the groups you mentioned, and just we're not there yet in terms of making this kind of commitment, but are still looking for great ideas and names. If anyone has groups that you think we should reach out to, please email me.
Well, this is definitely one of these short topics. I'm glad we're able to grab some time here after your parent-teacher conferences, and just in our little window here before we go 2 months between meetings. So thank you for joining us. This is going to be an alliance that helps transform transportation in the region. Seen a little bit of Danny's organizing in the months prior to this, and then the press release, the way it came out with all the names associated with it. This is definitely something to be a part of and to watch, because we have all these organizations trying to push in the right direction, limited by their resources. So you've identified one of the very, very key things we've got to work on. We have reached the end of our time. Thank you, Danny Katz. Thank you to all of our speakers tonight. As always, the YouTube video will be up in a few days. We've got a couple people's hands on it before it goes up. So you can pass this video around. Last month, I was tickled to see that a member of the press watched the video and reported on it, just watching the video and writing a news story on it. So welcome to any members of the press who find this video in the future. David Sachs, who was probably the best known of our editors for Streets Blog Denver when that was active, would often come to these meetings. So I was just tickled to see that the press is finding this again. We meet every other month. We'll be meeting the second Thursday of November, which I believe is the 10th. And then we're starting with the same schedule again in 2023. Everyone have a great night.